So good evening. I'm David Rivera. I am co-board chair of CLAGS, the Center for LGBTQ Studies, and I'm also an associate professor at Queens College. On behalf... No, you're not here for me. On behalf of CLAGS, the Graduate Center, and the City University of New York, I welcome you to a conversation with Jose Antonio Vargas, our 2016 Jose Esteban Munoz Award honoree. Before I give the official welcomes for CLAGS and the Graduate Center, I think it is necessary for us to begin tonight's program with a moment of silence in honor of those taken from us last week in Orlando and in solidarity with the community's mourning. Last week's tragedy is an extremely unfortunate reminder of the work left to be done to achieve social justice for marginalized communities. Tonight's program, honoring the legacy of Jose Esteban Munoz and the work of Jose Antonio Vargas, is a symbol of hope in the face of adversity and an example of social justice in action. Before we begin tonight's conversation, I would like to acknowledge those responsible for us being here tonight. First, a thank you to our host, the CUNY Graduate Center. As you may know, the Graduate Center is the primary doctoral granting body for the City University of New York. As a community of faculty and students committed to the ideas that learning is a public good, the Graduate Center regularly offers public programs featuring eminent thinkers, writers, and artists. The GC is not just a place dedicated to advanced education and research. It's also a vector of ideas where issues and ideas are framed in new and creative ways and shared with the city at large. And there is no better example of that than tonight. CLAGS, the Center for LGBTQ Studies, is the first university-based LGBTQ research center in the United States committed to nurturing cutting-edge scholarship, organizing events for examining and affirming LGBTQ lives, fostering network building among academics, artists, activists, policymakers, and community members, and providing fellowships to promote reflection on queer pasts, presents, and futures. CLAGS is administered by an all-volunteer board, staff, and executive director, Dr. Kevin Nadal. As co-chair of the board, I have witnessed the countless hours that the board, staff, and Kevin put into the successful operation of CLAGS. So will the staff and board members present please stand? Give them a round of applause. So also the operation of CLAGS is dependent on the financial generosity of the community. And this is where I'm asking for money. If you are not already one of our donors, I ask you to take a pledge card, and we should have some available on the registration table in the back, and consider making a contribution to support CLAGS's work in promoting and elevating LGBTQ issues. So the Jose Esteban Munoz Award was established by CLAGS to honor an individual whose life work embodies Dr. Munoz's scholarship on the nexus of gender, race, and sexuality. Tonight's recipient is an ardent and fierce advocate for some of the most vulnerable and marginalized among us. Jose Antonio Vargas is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, filmmaker, and activist. Through his nonprofit organization, Define America, he has brought a humanizing lens to the conversation about immigration and citizenship in an ever-changing America. Born in the Philippines and raised in the United States since the age of 12, Vargas uses his voice to advocate for those marginalized and threatened because of their immigration status and sexuality. Tonight's conversation is being facilitated by Dr. Kevin Nadal. As I mentioned, Dr. Nadal is the executive director of CLAGS, currently the president of the Asian American Psychological Association, and an associate professor of psychology at John Jay College of Criminal Justice and here at the Graduate Center. Dr. Nadal is the author of 6 books and numerous articles that focus on issues impacting LGBTQ communities, gender, Filipino identity, as well as many other marginalized communities. Throughout tonight's program, we encourage you to tweet and post on Facebook and Instagram, and as you do so, please use the hashtag CLAGSMunoz2016 to highlight tonight's event. So without further ado, I welcome Jose Antonio Vargas and Kevin Nadal to the stage.
Hi, everyone. Happy Pride. First of all, I want to thank David Rivera for that lovely introduction, and thank you all for coming. This is our second annual Jose Esteban Munoz Award lecture and conversation with Jose Antonio Vargas. Please give a big round of applause for Jose Antonio Vargas. So last year, we gave the award for the first time to Janet Mock. So it turns out that we're giving out the award to journalist. We honored Jose Esteban Munoz for his work with queer studies and for really introducing many concepts, particularly revolving intersectional identities. And so we want to honor his legacy by having this award given to somebody who is a leader in the field in queer studies, who might not necessarily be a traditional scholar of sorts, but rather somebody who does the work that Jose stood for, and so we honor him. So we're just gonna have a conversation today, which is gonna be very exciting, but first of all, I just wanted to say thank you for coming, and congratulations on all of your success these past several years. What's it like being back in New York?
I didn't realize that my photo would be that big outside. I didn't know that, and I invited Donald Trump to come.
Yeah.
His
Seat right there, reserved. Yeah.
Didn't George Takei did that in
Yeah.
Allegiance? I've been trying to get an interview with Donald Trump. I figured if he was going to try to win the White House on the back of all this misinformation and bigotry about immigration, at least he should talk to us about it. Unfortunately, he just hasn't had the courage to do it. It's great to be in New York. I lived there for 5 years. I'm actually probably gonna move back again halftime I live in LA now, so between LA and New York. Because, New York is always gonna be the center of the media, and I just started a whole media company. So I'm just gonna have to be here more, which is always great.
And also because New York is the greatest city in the world, right? Yeah. Don't worry, we're just live streaming.
But
It's
now,
all right.
now that I've been introduced to Koreatown in LA, and all the really, really
But
good
Koreatown
ramen.
is literally right there.
I know, but best ramen.
Okay.
Really interesting. I thought I was gonna hate LA.
Like the sound guy messed with your mic, because it's like, what are you doing?
No, I actually thought I was gonna hate LA, but I love it. I mean, maybe the traffic is like growing on me, but I just like that you can have a yard and stuff. So yeah.
Cool. So there's so many things that we can talk about today. I think one thing.
Can we talk about being gay Filipinos? Is that one
Sure
thing we can
can.
talk about? I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
But for real though, like how awesome/weird is it that we're at like a mainstream LGBTQ event and we have two queer Filipinos on stage?
Happy Pride.
Happy Pride.
I'm gonna say something that you might boo me about, so it's okay, you can boo me. People want to deport me, you want to boo me, go ahead. I'm not a big Pride person.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I think ever since I went to school at San Francisco State University when it was $800 a semester.
Wow.
Great education. And I lived in the Castro. I lived in the corner of Gay and Gayer in the Castro. I guess Gay Pride Month has become to be such a consumer capitalism oriented. Now don't get me wrong, like I like my shoes and stuff, but like sometimes I'm wondering, what are we really celebrating?
Right.
Especially in light of what happened in Orlando. Can you imagine Orlando happened on Gay Pride Month during Immigrant Heritage Month?
Yep.
It's just also Immigrant Heritage Month. So in some ways, Orlando, I think, in the era of Donald Trump, post-Apprentice, we really are at this, I would argue, a seminal moment in this country. And I'm not sure being proud for 1 month. I want to be proud every day. And I don't even want to have to be proud. I just want to be M.
Yeah.
Like, when do we just become M's, clearly we're not there yet, and that's why, but I would argue, I've been traveling nonstop, as you know, Kevin, for the past 5 years now. I've visited 48 states. The only 2 states are Montana and Alaska. Those are the 2 left. Apparently there's a bunch of Filipinos in Alaska, so I need to go to Alaska.
Are there any Alaskans in the house?
Alaskans.
No?
And apparently it's
All right.
close to Russia, so since I can't leave the country, it's the closest I'll get to Russia. But traveling around this country, I'm like, where is Gay Pride Month in Alabama? Like, where is it in Mississippi? Where is it in Oklahoma? Do we really need it in New York and San Francisco? Like, can we go all together to Montgomery and Jackson, Mississippi, and then have it there? I just feel like I've been a really big proponent in the past few years now of, as much as possible, preaching beyond who we think the choir is. Like, I only do Fox News now. I don't do MSNBC or CNN much anymore. Because Fox News is the place where I confuse a lot of people, right? And if I really want to hear people who want to grapple with their ideas of immigration, Megyn Kelly and Bill O'Reilly, for me, are really effective in that way. I've done maybe 80 Tea Party meetings, just trying to really engage people, to which my very presence is like a bunch of question marks, right? I'm gay, I look Asian, my name is Jose Antonio Vargas, in college I majored in African American studies, and I'm undocumented. I'm actually thinking maybe I should marry a Native American or a Jew, just to kind of balance it all out. And I wonder for us in the progressive movement, because apparently I'm a part of the progressive movement, I say that because progress to me shouldn't be married to a party. But someone in the progressive movement, I feel as if there's too much preaching to the choir. There's too much scratching our backs. There's too much arguing with ourselves, And I find this really interesting, especially among young people.
Yeah.
Do you talk to people who don't agree with you?
that a
How often do you
rhetorical
do
question?
that?
Well, you went in so many different directions. So let me be a psychologist and paraphrase for you. So it sounds like you first started talking about pride. But one thing that I think is important for us to recognize is this very notion of what is pride and what has pride become, even prior to what happened at Pulse this past week. Pride has really become this corporate thing where people are wearing T-shirts that are sponsored by these corporate entities, which is great in some ways because you have somebody to pay for your T-shirts, but at the same time, it's what is the corporation really there for? And so, we think about pride. For us, it's really important for us to realize what it's about. And then Pulse happened, and Pulse is something that is still very raw for a lot of us, most of us, all of us. And when Pulse happened, and especially this past week, and reflecting about what our conversation would be, I just thought, wow, this is going to be so emotional for us, and at the same time, it could potentially be so healing for us to come here together as a community and to talk about what happened. I know for me, it's important to recognize all the intersections of Pulse that a lot of the media isn't talking about. So understanding that most, or if not all, of the people who were killed at Pulse were people of color, Latinx, Latino, Latina, that some of them were undocumented, that this was a person who people are trying to say was influenced by terrorists, and it was only terrorists, and it was ISIS, that when it first came out, that they wouldn't say that it was a gay club. They kept on saying that this is this kind of nightclub, but they were easily able to say ISIS over and over and over again. So I think that's important for us to think about as we celebrate Pride, what it was before and also where we are now with it.
And the internalized homophobia that a lot of reports have really surfaced, right? There was 2 great Washington Post and New York Times profiles of Omar that talked about his growing up and how, he had a lot of gay friends apparently, and some people just assumed he was gay. I find the internalized homophobia, that conversation hasn't really been as discussed because in this country, we are still very much a homophobic country. I mean, let's not, let's not kid around that. And for me, I have to say, like, what I've been really struggling with about Paul's is having grown up in San Francisco and have had this dual, we have many identities, but the two chief identities of my life has been being undocumented and being gay. I came out as gay when I was in high school. It was junior year. It was, I think, 3 months after the Matthew Shepard killing. Not too long after Ellen DeGeneres was on the cover of Time magazine. And for me, it was watching Harvey Milk. You know, the documentary, The Life and Time, not Harvey Milk. I'm talking, hello? I'm talking the documentary, The Life and Times of Harvey Milk. My US history teacher showed that to the class. And after the end of the movie, Harvey Milk in the end of the movie says, if a bullet should enter my brain, let that bullet destroy every closet door. And I was sitting in the back of the class, and I kept thinking, I'm undocumented. I'm this illegal faggot in my head. That's what the media said. I was illegal and I was a faggot. Okay, I have to come out of one of these closets. So I chose the gay one. And then it took me 12 years to come out of the immigration one. But I think because of the homophobia, the homophobia that was so prevalent in my Filipino household, I never really fully dealt with being gay. It's not something that I've been criticized by a lot of people, actually, that I don't talk about being gay enough. That apparently I'm not gay enough. I thought that was really funny. Because what does that mean? I'm not gay enough. And you know, growing up, I didn't like going to gay bars. I just really hated what they represented. I don't know why, maybe that was my own internalized homophobia of that. The first gay bar I ever visited was a gay bar in San Francisco. I was still underage, and I got dragged into it. It was a gay bar where white guys look for Asian guys. What do you call those bars? Rice Queen bars. Do you know what Rice Queens are? So Rice Queen, apparently, and it's a pejorative, is when white guys like Asian guys. So they're the Rice Queens. Isn't that horrible? So I got taken to this club where it was like 10 white guys and like 30 Asian guys. It felt like Miss Saigon. I mean, I was like, what is this? Now that's a gay comment.
Did you start
That's
singing?
a pretty gay comment. And I remember looking at all the Asian guys and I'm going like, wait a second, am I supposed to go with one of these white guys? And to this day, I'm just gonna be really honest with you. I have so internalized that moment in my life that I actually have maybe only I haven't been with a white guy. Because I just didn't want that to be a defining part of my being a gay Asian man. I'm still dealing with this, as you can probably tell. But that was the kind of racism, right? And the kind of internalized phobias that we have about identity and race and how that intersects. That's why what has happened in Orlando in some ways, you can really tell how the media is so ill-equipped to talk about the intersections of these identities and what they represent to people.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that I've been thinking about the media is that they really need to come to a CLAGS event or maybe take like a queer studies class because everything needs to be in a perfect box for them, right? That you can only be gay or you can only be Latino, that there's no way to be
we are what, 10 blocks away from the headquarters of the New York Times? The same New York Times that, you know, for decades, right, were run by obviously homophobic editors. I mean, I remember a time, one of my first films was on the AIDS epidemic, and we did a profile of Larry Kramer, you know, the essential Larry Kramer. And that's when I really researched what was happening in the 80s in the Washington Post, in the New York Times, and the kind of language that was being used to talk about all these gay, you know, and straight ally activists who was doing that kind of work. And this is also at a time in which, you know, outside of The Advocate, what else are credible gay news organizations? I don't know, Kevin. Like, can you help me?
You mean back then or now?
Now.
Now? I mean, but that's another issue, right? So we have gay mainstream media, but do they really reflect the interests of communities of color within LGBTQ communities? And that's something that then becomes criticized because when people of color who are queer or trans say anything negative about a media organization that's white, that isn't as inclusive to
By the way,
to
I
people
love
of
white
color.
people. I made a documentary for MTV called White People.
Yeah.
Right? But the world doesn't revolve around white people. And the closer we get to understanding what that really means, the better for all of us, including white people. Right. I mean, in some ways, what Toni Morrison, I think in some ways what Toni Morrison has achieved in literature, right, which is writing about black people without the white gaze. Mm-hmm. Gaze, not gaze, but gaze, G-A-Z-E. Journalism without the white gaze. Journalism without trying to explain everything to white people. Right. As if white people are the center of the world. That is something that we haven't really done in journalism in this country. We are living at a time in which white students from K to 12 across the country are actually now in the minority. I live in Los Angeles. 72% of all women in Los Angeles are women of color. 72%. And in California, 51% of all Californians aged 25 and under is Latino. 51%. Latino or Latina, right? Or Latinx. I'm still learning the Latinx thing, so sorry about that. And California, what happens in California? We gave you guys soy milk, yoga. It starts in California and then it moves on, right? And so this is at a time in which American newsrooms are less diverse now than when I started in journalism in 1999. There are less people of color working in newsrooms now than they were back then. So how do you explain a country that is having this critical conversation on Black lives, a country in which 88% of the total population growth in the next 50 years are gonna come from Latinos and Asians? 88%. How are we gonna have this conversation if the media can't reflect all of us, right? I think that's a really, really critical question. And this is why, look, since I'm undocumented, this is really ironic. So I can't be employed. Like, you can't hire me, but I can hire you.
Yeah.
So I've been forced to become a business owner. I employ 19 people and offer really good health insurance and packages. But the irony of that is I actually can't benefit from the same benefits that I offer my employees because I'm their undocumented boss. But that's a whole other issue. So I really feel that, I don't know how many more times we have to convince the New York Times, which I love, which is essential to our democracy, that diversity is crucial, right? And so I'm like, hey, if they're gonna keep kind of flailing around, then I should just start my own thing and own it. So that's what I'm doing.
So tell us about this new venture that you have.
So I started a media company called Emerging Us. It's all about the emerging American identity. Again, questions about what does it mean. If you think about it, this country is only gonna get gayer, right? It's true, more LGBTQ people will continue to come out. It's only gonna get gayer, blacker, browner, more Asian. More mixed race. 1 out of 6 Americans are at least biracial, 1 out of 6, right? And women, white women, black women, women of all races and backgrounds will continue to break all the barriers that must break. So what's left? Straight white guys, who I love. So how much change can white heterosexual men handle? That, to me, is the question. Donald Trump doing this?
Yeah, pretty much.
Just kidding. So I made White People for MTV. The sequel right now is actually, I'm working on a documentary called Straight White Guys, starring Rush Limbaugh. I'm kidding. To really talk about what that means. Like, what does it mean to be a straight white guy in this country right now, right? In my interviews, I've found that a lot of them tell me that they feel like they can't say anything because the moment they say something, they're either going to be homophobic, racist, or sexist. So they just are quiet. I think that's dangerous. I think I'd rather you tell me what you're thinking than not, which is why we were talking backstage about in the progressive community, we are so quick to kind of call everybody out. I actually think that's really hurtful. Right? Because it's hurtful because then people just self-censor. I would rather the racist person tell me that he or she is being racist than not. Before I think about acronyms and all the trigger points, I would rather want to know what someone is actually thinking and why that person thinks the way that he thinks and feels. We, all of us, must traffic in empathy. If we can't do that, then what are we doing? And I don't know, I just feel like all of my travels and all of my engaging with especially straight white people, men and women, I really felt that there isn't enough room for these conversations. And that's why we are where we are. And it's a dangerous place to be, I think.
Yeah. Well, let me first commend you on the documentary White People. I thought it was really well made. Have people seen White People? I mean, not on the streets, but like the documentary. One of the things that I thought was fascinating about White People was that you brought to life what a lot of research has said. So for the past like 20 or 30 years, there have been studies on white people from psychological, sociological perspectives, looking at things like identity development and color blindness and privilege and so forth. And so it was really great to see that on film and for people to be able to relate to it. So I know a lot of educators have used the film as a way of teaching some of these concepts. The other thing that I was thinking about in reaction to what you were just saying was just this notion of what does it mean to have all of this privilege, and what are some of the cost of that. So one thing that really struck me was I was having dinner with my one straight white guy friend. He knows who he is, there's one. But after Pulse, he says to me, the one thing for me that that he just felt really bad about. He's like, as a straight white guy, whenever something like this happens, I can never feel that kind of pain that you're experiencing right now because I don't relate to any group that feels marginalized in that way. And I thought to myself, like, okay, I can hear what you're saying, but that's so incredibly sad to not have a community in that way that you can relate to. So while I don't want people to hurt or feel pain, it was just something that was just really profound to me.
But this is why this ideas of minority majority. Yeah. Like, I am tired of being your minority. And guess what? I'm actually not. Mm-hmm. I mean, we understand that people of color are actually in the majority in the world, right? Mm-hmm. Numerically speaking. And yet, so much of our existence must be explained. So much of it are questions to be, like, you're not gay enough, or you're too successful to be undocumented, or why do you talk English like that? I don't know, talk to PBS. I learned to talk like this because of Charlie Rose. So that was it. When I was a kid, when I got here and I found out I was illegal, my first instinct was, I need to talk like Charlie Rose and I need to listen to Dr. Dre. Because I need to go white and black so nobody can ever question my existence here. Having never been able to figure out, well, what does it mean to be Filipino? What does it mean to be Asian? Because what's Asian? What's API? Why do we term everybody Hispanic? You understand that Venezuelans and Colombians can't stand each other, right? I'm just kidding. But all of these things that we've done all of these things that the American government has done to box us all in, and everybody is trying to get the hell out of these boxes. Right. While at the same time, never fully having to unpack the most mysterious box of all, which is the white box, which, by the way, is fluid. Like, when did the Jews become white? When did Italians become white? When did the Irish become white? Are Asian people just trying to be white? Somebody asked me this question recently. I'm like, what? Are you counting Filipinos when you say Asian? Because, we're API, right? Asian Pacific Islander. So I feel like we're at this time, back to your friend, by the way, in my interviews across the country, preparing for straight white guys, I've been really struck by this moment that we're living in right now, which I think James Baldwin saw coming, which is the other is now all of us. Mm-hmm. We have arrived at a demographic and cultural reality in which the other is all of us. So you talk to some working class white people, in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, right? And they will tell you that they feel like they're strangers in their own country. And they don't have even the language to talk about it. Rush Limbaugh is giving them the language. Bill O'Reilly is giving them the language. But they haven't figured out what that language actually is. They're still dealing with the black thing, right? And now you're throwing the Asian, the Latino, and the gay thing like right on top of it.
Right.
And so that to me is a very unprecedented moment in this country. And what I fear a lot as a storyteller, right? I'm a journalist, I'm a filmmaker, is how do we create spaces where people can actually connect and see each other more fully and more humanely? How do we do that?
Yeah. I mean, as we get our microphone switched for you,
Oh, really?
I think this is where education comes in. I think that one thing that people who don't have this language, or who oftentimes have never been exposed to people who are different than them, they only hear what they hear from the media, or they hear hearsay from what they learn from their parents or from others. And this is why queer studies, ethnic studies are so important, because if you don't get that in your mainstream curriculum, then you're never going to be exposed to that.
I almost had a panic attack in Ohio, pretty close to where Toni Morrison grew up, Lorain, Ohio, where they put Toni Morrison's book in the emerging authors section.
Wow.
So I went to the manager, and I'm like, you know where Faulkner and Twain is? That's where Toni Morrison needs to go.
Yeah.
And then he was like, well, why do you care? Yeah. You're not black. I'm like, I'm sure my eyebrows did whatever they did. And I'm looking, for me, I'm really so grateful to public schools. I'm a child of public schools. So from 8th grade to sophomore year in high school were the three, I'm not sure I would be able to survive what I'm surviving now if what I hadn't read that early is not what I read. The Bluest Eye when I was in 8th grade, Mr. Zahner, a wonderfully progressive straight white guy, assigned The Bluest Eye to my English class. The Bluest Eye, Letter to Birmingham Jail, right? Notes of a Native Son by Baldwin. Those are the three books written by three black Americans that really, for me, created the ground that I can walk on and the space that I can occupy. And so if we do not acknowledge that these black authors, what black literature is American literature, right? And I'm almost embarrassed to say that I don't know enough about Native American literature. I don't. When we were filming White People, it was the first time I'd actually been to a reservation. I had never been to, have you been to, I've never been to one. So we went to Crazy Horse High School. I knew that I was gonna make a film called White People. It was only 45 minutes long, but I knew that I had to involve Native Americans and black people in it, right? So this was one way to do it, was to film at a Native American high school. All the teachers were white, and the students were Native American Lakota tribe. And can you imagine the white teachers are using history textbooks, calling the very students that they're teaching savages. And then we were filming for like 2 days, and one of the breaks, this young woman approaches me and goes, "Oh, I know who you are." I'm like, oh, okay. "Oh, it's about time you came here." I just don't understand how you can talk about immigration and all of that without talking about us. Thankfully, after the film aired, she wrote me an email saying, "Mr. Vargas, that was good."
Yeah.
She was right, and I'm so glad that she called me out. She was absolutely right. She's absolutely right. So I feel like, in this country, and this is so prevalent all across, this country, we talk about this country being built by immigrants. That leaves out two very, very crucial people, right? How can we do that? Is it easier for us to just keep saying that, right? And for me, the danger here, I'm working on a project right now on anti-blackness in the Latino and the Asian community, right? Which in some ways is a really necessary way to look at white supremacy looks like, to look at what white supremacy has done, right? And how that travels and the conversations that happens. Now, mind you, I'm talking now for 5 minutes. I haven't talked about LGBTQ. And there are some people who say, well, where do gay people fit in all of this? Everywhere. Right? To me, it's a question of how do we acknowledge the inherent intersections of these identities and these struggles without having to constantly, what I find that's really tragic in the progressive community is this oppression Olympics that we all have to be a part of. Oh, you can't do this because you're not that, right? And the silence that happens, the silencing that happens, especially among young people, among millennials, I find really, really interesting and kind of sad. And I can go on about this and get booed, but whatever.
I mean, but I hear a lot of things that you're saying. I think that it's really important for us to question and to disrupt what even the meaning of what it means to be a good gay person, a good queer or trans person. And by you just existing and being who you are, even if you don't necessarily do what people are asking you to do or expecting you to do as this gay, queer person of color, that you're revolutionary. And I think that one thing, but here's one thing that is interesting, it's just like, a lot of times I have students who will say things like that, I'm not political enough, I'm not on the street enough, even though I'm teaching queer studies, even though I'm teaching ethnic studies in every aspect, even though I'm having students who, give me bad reviews and I get threatened to be sued regularly. Ask all of my friends. I have a lot of those types of students. If
Let's
you're
talk
here,
about
hi.
that. Are any of them here?
But listen.
Raise your hands.
No, they're not here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. They're not.
If I'm not afraid of Donald Trump, I'm not afraid to talk about this
I
with
know.
anybody.
But listen, but here's the thing. So my whole thing that I just have learned to just to come to terms with is me being a queer person of color in this building, in academia. That's revolutionary. And we need
Kevin,
to be okay with being who we are and accepting that there are so many different ways of what it means to be a good queer person of color.
And that's enough.
Yeah.
Like you being here and you doing what you do is enough. Yeah. And sometimes I have to really grapple with all these expectations that people have. People like, apparently I'm so privileged. Why am I not marching in the streets? Why am I not tying myself to the White House fence? Like, why am I not? I'm a writer, I'm a filmmaker. That's my activism, that's what I do. So I don't know. And again, like for me, as somebody who's been being put on tests my whole life, it's been really hurtful to be put on a test by the very people who look like me. Absolutely. Who I think share my existence and my identity. It's almost gotten to the point where I'm like, fuck Facebook. Like, I'm just gonna quit Facebook. Yeah. But I can't, because I can't. It's the only way I communicate with my mom in the Philippines. See, got you.
Got you.
See, it's the only way my sister, oh my God, this is being streamed live, huh?
Yeah. Well, just don't tell them. You don't tell them about your other appearances, right?
So the Facebook is the only way I communicate with my brother and my sister and my mom and my relatives in the Philippines. So Mark Zuckerberg invented this thing, man, and it's connecting people, and it's cheap, it's free. So, but when you get called out by other people in the movement, so to speak, I'm just kind of like, yo, like you deal with your thing, because I can't go around correcting everybody's mistakes. I'm too busy doing stuff. Right? I have no time to deconstruct if I'm busy constructing. So deconstruct on your own time.
Yeah. And I one thing that I'm hearing is that it's to be criticized by people that aren't part of your community who are going to say lots of hurtful things, that's one thing. But to be criticized by the people that you have shared identities with, that's very hurtful in a lot of ways.
To me though, thankfully again, I was raised by my grandmother, so I try as much as possible to lead with as much humility as I can.
Of course.
That I'm a kid who grew up in a house that had no plumbing, so that's where I come from. So be quiet, just be grateful, and know your space and hold your ground, right? And so I never want to. This is why it's been so fascinating being in this position where people congratulate you for coming out as undocumented. I'm like, there are 12 million of us. This country couldn't exist without us. Have you been to LA? Right? We are so visibly invisible. And it almost seems insulting to congratulate somebody for just existing. Right? And so I don't want that. I don't want congratulations. I don't need awards. I'm fine, you know? I just want to be able to do my work. And I want the work to be able to connect, right? And I just made a comment that I should edit a little bit. It is important that we deconstruct things. That is important. But I think sometimes we're so busy criticizing and deconstructing that we're not really understanding the context of what we're trying to discuss, you know? Toni Morrison once said this amazing, amazing quote from James Baldwin. The quote was, "Your crown has already been bought and paid for. Your ancestors, your grandparents, your parents, they already gave it up for you. It's already done. Now you can love yourself. It's possible." When I think about that, I think of Harvey Milk, I think of Barbara Giddings, I think of Franklin Kameny. I think of all of these LGBTQ people of color that we don't even know about, whose names we don't even, can mutter. And all the price that they had to pay so that we can be here in this space right now. How do we celebrate them, and how do we create a different kind of space where people can just be themselves and not have to prove anything to anybody? Because that's what freedom is. That's what freedom is.
I mean, the one thing that I'm hearing is this idea of empathy, and for us to use that more, to empathize and criticize, to not just criticize, to understand that if somebody is, in a public arena like you are, to yes, you might have some critical opinions about their work, but also to empathize that perhaps where's this person coming from? What is their struggle? What is their battle that they face? That we all can be activists in different ways. That some of us might be activists on the streets. Some of us are activists by always being the only person or queer person of color in the room, and that's activism. And I think we need to embrace that instead of, again, having these boxes of what it means to be good in whatever way it is.
You know, I've actually gotten to a point now where sometimes I'm more nervous in speaking in front of progressive audiences than I am in speaking in front of conservatives. Just because I never know if I'm using the right language or if I'm triggering somebody. Mm-hmm. And that's when I'm like, oh my God, what is happening to me? I have to really make sure that I own my own freedom. The moment I start self-censoring myself, then that's dangerous for me. Maybe I should just self-deport after that, right? But now, let's be honest about this too. Like, I think questioning each other, this country was founded in criticism, right? What did Baldwin said? I love this country more than any other country in the world, and exactly for that reason, I insist on the right to criticize her perpetually. Absolutely. There's criticism and then there's projection. I just try not to tolerate the projection stuff. Like, you deal with your stuff, and then I'll deal with mine, right?
We have lots of things that we could talk about. I wanted to acknowledge that we actually met a month before you wrote your article in the New York Times.
We did?
Which was 5 years ago, courtesy of Ben de Guzman. Where are you at, Ben?
Oh, Ben.
Hey, girl.
Ben, can you stand up?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. This is my friend Ben, our friend Ben de Guzman. Ben, you're not standing up. Ben, come on, man.
There's Ben.
Let me just brag about Ben. The price that Ben has paid in terms of just existing in Washington, D.C., where there are not many API leaders and advocates, this guy has been solely responsible in many ways for making sure that Filipino-American veterans of the war got the due that they deserve.
Yeah, right up at that.
Hey, Ben. And he's gay, too. Isn't that great?
But that was 5 years ago, and a lot has happened since then. And what is it like to reflect on the 5 years and all the work that you've been doing, and to be here in the moment that you are?
Actually, it's really funny. Like, 5 years ago right now, I was at the New York Times building, which is just a few blocks from here, looking at the proof of the essay that was to be published tomorrow, 5 years. It's been really crazy. I've been traveling a lot, which is not good. But I guess I've learned a lot of things about myself and about this country, about our country. But I have to say, I'm getting to this point where I really need to sit down and figure out what kind of work needs to be created so I can use whatever privilege I have to create work that speaks to the moment, right? But the biggest thing I have to say is, earning my privilege, right? Like, you're looking at the most privileged and documented immigrant in America. I am. So I have to own that. I have to own what that means without, punishing myself too much for it. And trying to make sure that I speak in the most authentic and organic way that I can. I can only represent myself. I can't represent 11 million people. In the beginning, actually, there were a few undocumented leaders who came to me and said, "We don't want you representing us. You don't even know what it's like to work hard." So that was tough. So it's been a really interesting journey, and the people that know you well, or who know you well, because they think you share an experience with them, the I don't know if criticism is the right word, but the conversations have been very illuminating and sad in some ways. So I have to really focus on knowing that I can only do so much, right? That I can't fit all of these roles, and I'm not even like I can only imagine what it must be like for people who are famous and have how they deal with all this external stuff that happens and how that impacts what they create and what they do. So I try really hard to own my own system of reality and to not overthink about, after White People, for example, when the film came out, I got a lot of emails from immigrant rights leaders who were like, "What are you doing, right, working on a film about white people? Can't you do a film on incarceration or, detention systems?" Or I'm like, well, because my argument was, until I can talk to white people about the fact that they're not white, that's constructed, that they come from somewhere, there are 3 questions that every American must be able to answer. Where did you come from? How did you get here? Who paid? Native Americans can answer those questions. They'd be like, "Get the hell out of here." Now, Black Americans can certainly answer that question. If you can't answer those 3 questions, you have no right to talk to me about a border that you don't understand, right? So that's a conversation that we should have with all people. So that was my explanation, but to some immigrant rights leaders, they're like, "You're taking attention away from the issue." I mean, immigration and race and citizenship are all intersected, right? And that's something, it wasn't until 1927 that we gave Native American citizenship rights. The experience of Filipinos in this country is really, really unique. I just found out through research a few months ago that the poem "White Man's Burden" that Rudyard Kipling wrote,
yeah.
Did you know that it was actually in justification of the Philippine invasion?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I did not know that. Sorry, I'm not as smart as all of you. I didn't know that. So those things about how I just want to be able to exist and not have to explain and justify not doing enough or not doing more of, right? I have to really take care of my own health in that way, so I can function.
So speaking of which, what is your favorite microaggression that you experience?
My favorite one. Is your name really Jose? That's probably my favorite one. I mean, I'd probably have enough money to buy a really nice apartment in Manhattan.
Yeah.
By any time someone asks me why that's my name. Now I've gotten to the point, oh, why is that your name? Actually, at one time, I was at a conference somewhere in Wisconsin. I was attending it for another reason. And I signed my name as Peter Chang. It was so awesome. No one asked me why that was my name. Because I guess I look like a Peter Chang, right? But you put Jose Antonio Vargas, they're like, why is there no accent in the E? I don't know. Maybe it's the Filipinos' own way of rebelling against Spanish colonialism. It's like, we don't need your accents,
Yeah.
right? I don't know. I'm actually thinking that maybe I should marry Native American, Jewish, or a Mexican, because people think I'm Mexican all the time. Just my name. Sometimes Telemundo, I mean, I love Telemundo, it's a wonderful news network. They still show up at events, and they're disappointed when they find out that I don't speak Spanish. I'm like, do you speak Tagalog? Because I do. I speak Sambal, I speak, So that is probably like my favorite microaggression. And maybe the question of privilege, which I'm very careful about, right? Like, is it a privilege that I haven't seen my mother for 23 years? Is that a privilege? Is it a privilege that, I have a brother who's 18 and the only thing that he knows about me is I'm the one that sends him, iPhones and baseball caps, right? I have a sister, she was born I left when she was a 1.5-year-old, and she's now almost 25. Like, so I don't, and this is a whole other topic, but Oppression Olympics and what that does, I think is something that really requires greater dialogue and greater empathy, right? And I worry sometimes too about the space for white allies. Like, when do we talk about what does it mean to be an ally? And what does it mean? Like, what is the space for white, straight people, straight white guys, to be in these conversations, right? Like, I think that's a crucial question.
And the other question is, who gets to call themselves an ally? Because a lot of people say they're allies, and then I see some of the things that you
that
say
means
and
you
do.
you stand next to me, not in front of me. That means you speak for yourself and not assume that you're speaking for me, right? Like, there are many, many definitions, but again, creating that space, what I don't want, and this is why I made white people. I was really kind of stunned when I visited so many colleges at how many young white students would come up to me and say that they don't know how to talk about race. We found, MTV did a study with Define American, we found that 49% of young white people feel that they're as much a victim of racism and discrimination as people of color. And I was at Oberlin. All right? They grew up with Barney. I love you, you love me, we're a happy family, right? Like, the ideal is to be colorblind. And race cuts across so many of these issues. But we can't ignore class. We certainly can't ignore gender. We can't ignore, we can't ignore kind of the root causes. One of the things we haven't even talked about, because it rarely comes up, is what are the root causes of migration? Why do people move? I come from the Philippines, 7,107 islands, right? Because of global warming, many of those islands are going to disappear. Where are they going to go? Migration is one of the defining issues of this time, right? And guess what? If the United States, Spain, Portugal, Britain, France, if all these countries think that they could come to our countries and imperialize it and colonize it, what makes them think that we're not going to come to their country? We're only here because you were there. Well, why were you there? That's the question. And how immigrant rights intersect with LGBT rights, right? And all the fights that is happening all across Africa, all across South America. I mean, the homophobia that is prevalent in the Philippines, I hear. I haven't been since I was 12, but I read all these stories. Apparently, the Philippines is now the epicenter of the AIDS epidemic in Asia. Why is that happening? So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that is a common denominator in all the things that we're talking about is colonization and white supremacy. And I think that we don't talk about that enough. We don't have that in our history books. People aren't taught the correct history of the world. They're taught this very colorblind way of thinking. And the thing about colorblind is with not just white people who want to be colorblind, but just the whole concept of itself is that people don't want to talk about race because they say that it does not matter, which can be quite insulting to people of color who experience racism every day of their lives. And the sentiment shouldn't be that race does not matter, but that race does matter, and but perhaps that we can create a world where it should not. But we're not there in that world yet.
Well, you know what happened with white people was, and it was like last summer. God, it was last summer. After the 1-minute trailer was dropped, Rush Limbaugh hated it. Fox News, Megyn Kelly talked about it without having seen it. I was like, yo, here's an entire film. Watch it first before you say anything. And then people on the left started criticizing it for saying, what are you doing talking to white people? And apparently, when it aired on MTV, it was between Teen Mom and Catfish. So a lot of people watched it. It was trending on Twitter, globally and nationally. And when I was looking at Twitter, apparently when white people cry, it's called mayonnaise tears. Did you know that? I did not know that. There was all these memes on Twitter, and then people were telling me, the people who criticize whatever, were saying to me that I was too easy on white people, that I was like holding their hands. And then I was like, did you see the death threat that I just got? Because I'm going to Nebraska next week. Apparently for the white people in Nebraska, this was way enough. So that's when you know, by the way, that you've done your job. If you pissed off both ends, that's when you're like, okay, I'm good to go, right? But I'm only, as far as I'm concerned, you know, the work that Tim Weiss has done to me has been groundbreaking, right? Peggy McIntosh, right? But having been to a lot of white conservative places in which white people feel that they're discriminated against, you know, I can't go to a trailer park in Little Rock and talk to poor white people about white privilege. They think I took it, right? So I think a new conversation needs to be had about that, you know? And we need more white people to talk to other white people about this stuff. Because people of color can't do it all. But unpacking whiteness and what it means nationally and globally is probably the work that I will continue to do, Donald Trump or not.
Yeah, one thing that's really important as we talk about this is that one of the reasons why white people don't know how to talk about race, and why a lot of people of color might not necessarily have the language to talk about race, is because people start to talk about it when they're adults, and that we don't talk about this with our children from a young age. And so all of a sudden you're taking an ethnic studies class and you're like, aha, I have this race that is part of me or that has affected my experience, but what happened for the 18 years before that where you never talked about race at all?
Before we take questions, I don't know if you remember, last summer, after the Supreme Court decision on same-sex marriage, President Obama held like a reception in the East Wing. It was apparent, I wasn't there. It was mostly all the gay LGBT leaders in DC, right? Were you there, Ben? Okay. Apparently, a woman named Genesette Rodriguez? Gutierrez.
Yes.
A trans Latina immigrant, right? Started heckling, the word heckling, I'm always careful about that word, started heckling the president and saying, you know, what about trans women in detention? Now, let's think about this moment, which is very like Tony Kushner-like, right? So the first minority president, the first black president, who has deported more than 2 million people, most of them are Latinos, right? Celebrating same-sex marriage in a room of mostly white LGBT people. And the Latina transgender woman got kicked out. It's a play, right? That's America right now. And, you know, I covered Obama in 2008 when I was at the Washington Post and I was still in the closet about being undocumented. And I remember being in places in the South where people would openly just say, I'm not going to vote for that N-word, right? I think we underestimate what this moment has been to have the first black president. Of course, we can talk about the fact that he's actually biracial, but no one wants to talk about the white in Obama, maybe because they can't face it themselves. I don't know. But having that moment, reach this moment of, I don't know if the president will be able to fully explain how he has deported more than 2 million people in almost 8 years. I don't know how he's going to be able to ever justify that. Most ever in the history of this country, more than any other president, right? Mind you, we don't even talk about undocumented black immigrants in this country. They're not at all a part of the vernacular, right? So I just think that moment crystallized kind of where we are nationally, especially in the progressive movement. And I wonder now that being gay, people feel like so much has been won. And I come from a place of, I gotta go home to my grandmother and keep telling her that, Lola, there's nothing wrong with me because I'm bakla, because I'm gay. I'm still the same. There's nothing wrong with me. You made me, so there's nothing wrong with me. I have to still have that conversation with my 78-year-old grandmother. So don't talk to me about winning, right? Marriage isn't for everybody. It was never something that I thought about was for me. Because I thought I have to deal with all this other stuff. Marriage is for white people. They can do that. I actually thought that when I was a kid. Now I don't anymore, thank God. But,
Yeah. So before we go to questions, I mean, one thing that I think is really interesting is that, of course, Pulse, terrible tragedy, but now a lot of these mainstream white LGBTQ organizations, they now are taking up gun lobbying or gun control as their main lobby. And so between marriage equality and now, what have they been doing? We have trans women, especially trans women of color, who are killed at horrible rates this year we've had already, how many now? 17 trans women of color who have been killed in this country, and nobody wants to talk about it. So why aren't these white mainstream LGBTQ organizations talking about that? And so I think that's something that we need to think about.
I have had a lot of very
disrupt.
painful conversations with LGBT leaders about the silence on immigration. The silence. It's okay to go to a lake, to Latin club at night, right? Latin night at the gay club. Where'd you think the Latin guys come from? How'd you think they got here? Right? I mean, and Asian people are almost invisible when we talk about immigration in this country. Asian immigrants are actually the fastest growing immigrant population, documented and undocumented. 72% of all Asian adults in this country are immigrants. 72%. Asian people are more immigrants than Latinos are immigrants. And yet when immigration comes up, Mexican, Latino, brown.
Yeah.
There's the media for you.
All right, we could take some questions if people want to go to the microphone.
You can ask me anything you want, and please criticize me. It's okay. Let's just have a good, constructive, civil conversation.
One thing that as the first people come up, one thing I want to just mention is just, I think it's really important for us to honor the Pulse victims and to continue to talk about intersections, especially because people don't and won't. I think it's what I've seen a lot of is a lot of disrespect towards Latino, Latinx, Latina, LGBTQ people, and the space of losing people who matched all of their identities. And for a lot of white gay men particularly, I've seen a lot of this, why are you trying to make it your tragedy? It's all of our tragedy. Well, it wasn't. It was a nightclub that was...
White gay guys say that?
Yeah,
I haven't heard
go
that.
Google it. But it's like, no, it was, I don't even know what percent, but I want to say almost all were people of color and almost all were Latino. Yeah. And there is that intersection. And yes, it was a gay club that happened to be Latino night that night. But there's something about being able to give space to folks as well as to understand how intersections affect everything. And so I think we really need to make that conversation.
Wait a second,
especially
Kevin.
If people
no one is asking a question?
Because you answered everything.
What's going
huh?
on? Is that Jeremiah?
Yeah.
Ask a question, Jeremiah. Do you have a question? No, you don't. Okay. I'm totally pointing at my friend over there. Who works at Condé Nast, who's doing an amazing job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. Could you say your name and before you ask your question, please?
Yeah, sure. My name's Naomi, and I'm a PhD student in musicology here. And so, you've touched a fair bit on the immigration issues that we have in the U.S. And I was just curious if you would talk a little bit what you think about what's going on right now in the UK, that they're, about to vote on whether or not to leave the European Union, and, how their immigration stuff relates.
I'm sorry I haven't even talked about that. So let's put this into context. 69 million refugees around the world. That's the most ever in the history of this world. 270 million migrants worldwide. We don't know how many of them are undocumented or documented, but 270 million people. We are looking at the greatest migration of a people that this world has ever seen. Right? Now, where women's rights, where LGBT rights, where environmental rights, where all of these issues intersect, we're not even talking about, right? And I have to say that for me, the biggest success of Define American, one of our biggest successes, has been how many groups in Europe are actually looking at our model. So somebody just started a Define Irish movement, a Define Danish movement, I think Define German or something. Because again, this idea of what happens when all these other people come. And unfortunately, there isn't enough conversations being had about the root causes of why they're coming. Like, we don't come here because we enjoyed being called criminals and unlawful people, right? I mean, America-wise, right? We put a sign outside of the U.S.-Mexico border that says, keep out. Then 10 yards in, what do we say? Help wanted. You can't have it both ways. You can't depend on our labor and say, wait a second, get out of here, illegal. Like, what do you want? So in the UK and in Europe, I think this question of, and this is why it's so important that America has this conversation, because the way we think of citizenship in this country is not the same way that Europeans do, right? And in some ways, they're looking at us. I just spoke to a reporter from, oh God, how do you pronounce that organization in France? Jean Slav France. That. You know what I'm talking about? Agent, I don't speak French. That one. And we were talking about, I was trying to get them to do a story, I'm trying to get them to do a story on the language that is being used in Europe and where they got that language. And guess where? America. Right? Calling migrants illegals, saying that they don't belong here. Right? And this question of the imperialistic colonization history of Europe, which is where it all started, to me is a necessary conversation. By the way, I cannot wait to be able to travel around the world. Right now, we're waiting on the Supreme Court decision on the president's executive orders. It's probably going to come Thursday or next Monday, and that is going to determine whether 5 million people like me can actually travel. And I gotta tell you, when I get to travel, Europe and having these conversations about that is one of the first things I'm probably going to do. And of course, seeing my mom is the first thing, but that's probably second.
If I can say one more thing, I
Yeah.
also just want to say, as I said, I'm Canadian, and I just want to say I respect so much, the way that you speak about the immigrant experience, even though I'm totally documented and don't have half the problems that you do, and I'm white and I look American and whatever, the way that you speak about being an immigrant, it speaks so much to me, and I really appreciate everything
Oh,
you've done.
thank you. I love Anne of Green Gables. It was how I learned English. Tomorrow is always fresh with no mistakes in it yet.
Over here, please.
So I wasn't going to ask a question since you
Oh
put me on the
God, now I'm
spot
scared.
earlier.
He knows me too well.
So I will say first that June 12th is Philippine Independence Day, and so I am never going to be able to think about that in the same way again. So that's real for me. That's not my question. That was my comment. My question is, so a lot of, and you said stuff about the media saying this and the media saying that. I mean, to me, these are conservatives that are saying this,
Yeah.
right? So the media is the platform through which, arch conservatives are putting forth their ideology that wants to be normalized. But so on that note, there's this move to say, well, to couch all of these criticisms against progressives by, oh, they're just being politically correct or whatever, but you have to say the phrase radical Islam. So to me, no one is sort of calling that irony out. So whose job is that? Might be yours. No, I'm just kidding. No, but
Thanks, Ben.
no, but to me, that is just this kind of intense irony that no one has named, and it bugs me every time I hear someone trying to say, well, shame on them for them not using the right language, and then turning around and saying, oh, but but they're being
Radical
politically
Islam.
correct.
I have to say, by the way, kudos to the president. Did you hear his speech on this, talking about why and why Hillary Clinton had to use it, right? And this is where this words matter. We actually have a campaign at Define America literally called Words Matter. And
But not all words matter.
not. Okay, that's really funny, yo. That's funny. Yes, words matter. And I have a friend actually who's working on a story now on LGBT Muslims, which I'm really looking forward to seeing because I haven't seen a lot of stories on that, right? What was that? Oh, they did? Oh, was it good? Was it this week? I haven't read it. Okay, good. I'll read that. There hasn't been a lot on it yet, so I'm looking forward to reading that. I just feel like whenever we try to blame a group of people or an ideology, right, I think we get in trouble in general because it's never that simple. And again, this is another example of how the complexity of our experiences and our identities always get like kind of filtered in this digestible, accessible. We'll just blame that, right? I have to tell you, and this is out of your thing now, Ben, but I completely underestimated the level of vitriol against Mexicans in this country. Literally, I would be in conversations where people use the word Mexican to explain everything, right? And that's why it's even more important for non-Mexican people to call that shit out when they hear it, right? And then when people tell me, well, I can't correct my mom. Oh, yes, you can. If you don't correct your mom, who will, right? And, particularly when I was in Alabama, because I was there for a month and a half, that was around the time when they passed a law saying that if you don't have your papers, right, anybody can ask you for your papers if you get stopped by police. And there was this woman who happened to be Mexican who was born in the U.S. She said she had to move. She's going to move out of Alabama because she just got into many panic attacks driving down the road, thinking, what if I get pulled over? I don't have my ID. What do I tell people? So Mexican, being used in that way, I mean, we all have a responsibility to call that out in the same way that when people use radical Islam. What about radical Christianity? What about radical Catholicism, right? So I think it's important that we, put that into context.
One last question. Thanks.
No, the last one? Okay. Hi, I'm Terrence. I'm referring back to what you said earlier about preferring the conservative, right-wing, racist person, anti-immigrant, to be completely open about what they feel to your face, basically. And I don't want to talk about Trump. I want to talk about Trump's followers.
Yes.
Do you feel like there's some hope there because these people are actually out there he's made it. He's normalized overt racism, homophobia,
Sexism.
everything. Yeah. So do you feel like there's some hope there? There's some progress?
This is why I'm actually really thankful for Donald Trump. I'm not thankful that, I have an 8-year-old niece who's asking me about what Trump is saying. I'm not thankful for that experience for my 8-year-old niece, right? But I am thankful that he's showing us many parts of our country that has always existed. And now we get to confront it and face it. The question is, are we going to confront it and face it? In my experience, especially when I do conservative Tea Party events and I bring my tax forms, I literally have a piece of document from the Social Security Administration saying how much money I've contributed into the Social Security Fund. You guys get that, right? So I apparently paid like $140,000 since I've been working, right? I find it really, really interesting that with my fake number, they have that. And yet, the Department of Homeland Security wants to deport me, but IRS and the Social Security Administration are more than happy to take the money. So what do you want? And then when I tell this to conservative people, they're totally confused. They're like, is that from the IRS? Yes, that's from the IRS. How do they know where you live? I don't know, because they want the money, right? And then they get really confused and then they get really mad that they don't know that. I'm like, I don't know, talk to Fox News. They don't talk about us contributing, right? They get really angry. And then one of them said to me once, well, I mean, that's unfair. Yes, sir, it's called taxation without representation. Which, by the way, people in the District of Columbia has been living with for decades, right? Because DC is a predominantly black town. I lived in DC for 5 years. I was totally amazed. And I don't even have the words for it. The District of Columbia has the worst AIDS epidemic in this country. Why? Because for 24 years, people in DC could not use their own tax dollars to pay for a needle exchange program, which is responsible for 1/3 of the HIV infections. Why? Because it's black people. Why can't we just say that? Right? So I remember being in DC when I first moved there right out of college thinking like, how did this happen? And then how a lot of people in DC would just like circle around it. And people would tell you, this is the most powerful city in the world. I'm like, have you been to Anacostia? We can go right now. You tell that to people in Anacostia, which is across this, across the bridge from DC. So I feel like we are finally facing really a lot of the ugly things about ourselves and about the lies that we tell ourselves. And I'm grateful that Donald Trump is letting us do that, right? The question, though, is how all of this shakes out. The fact that the polls have shown that we're looking at the negatives of both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump are through the roof, right? In this country, elections have always been about hope. Now it's like, ooh, shit, right? I have to say, by the way, one more thing about this. I covered Hillary in 2008. I was assigned to her. For like 2 weeks because the woman who was assigned to her got kicked out. So I don't know what happened, but I got assigned to her. And mind you, like, I'm undocumented. I wasn't out yet. And I'm like on the plane with Hillary Clinton and I'm freaked out the whole time. Hillary Clinton is not allowed to be Hillary Clinton. The Hillary Clinton that I got to meet and like be in presence with in those 2 weeks is not the Hillary Clinton that is portrayed in the media. And in some ways, she's done that to herself. I think she's put up such a wall. And in some ways, I really want Meryl Streep to just play her for 5 minutes. I think, hey, if Meryl Streep can humanize Margaret Thatcher, she can certainly humanize Hillary Clinton. Right? Isn't that like an SNL skit? Like, just show up, Meryl, and just play Hillary, and just show us what's really happening inside.
So I just have a follow-up to that. A follow-up to your white people documentary. Is it possible there could be a Trump followers documentary in the future?
Actually, 2 of them are Trump people already. So, but I mean, to me, it's not just Trump, right? I mean, in some ways, the Republican Party has enabled Donald Trump. This is why they can't be like saying, oh, we didn't create him. Oh, yeah, you did. Right? This is Donald Trump. He belongs in the party of Donald Trump. Right? He just thought that it might be easier to win the nomination on the Republican side because he was certainly not going to win on the Democratic side, being that racist. So I just think we have to be really honest about that too. But I have to say, one thing about this, I know that you're hearing reports now on, Donald Trump is not doing that well in fundraising and all that kind of stuff. Having traveled as much as I do, I actually do not think we should underestimate that Donald Trump could possibly win this election. We should not underestimate this. Why? There's not enough investment in turning out Latinos and Asian voters. The money is just not there for turnout, right? And white people are very, very, very energized in the first reality television election we've ever had. It's like watching The Real Housewives meets The Apprentice, like all in once. And so I don't think we should underestimate that Donald Trump can actually win the presidency of this country.
So if that doesn't activate you all, I hope that you do something. I want to thank Jose for being here.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much. And I'd like to invite Dr. Maria Sharon Del Rio and Dr. David Rivera back up. I know you said you don't like awards, so now it's a little awkward because we're going to give you an award.
Did I know that?
You do now. Yeah. So.
Is it a Starbucks card? Oh.
So, to Jose Esteban Munoz Award, presented, the Jose Esteban Munoz Award presented to Jose Antonio Vargas for his community leadership, advocacy, and promotion of LGBTQ studies by CLAGS.